But in your case, I mean, you've been doing this for quite a while because your following on LinkedIn is pretty impressive. So, I mean, it's like well over 25K now and growing. And, but for me, it's the message they have in your posts that are quite poignant in so many different ways. And I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot of these points. And to me, when I see such thoughtful, write-ups or such thoughtful posts, to me, it indicates a story behind the person. And let's start with the vampire thing, because you're running an agency called Vampire Digital. How did that start?
Yeah, so that like you said, there is a story there, and it's not just a name I plucked out of thin air. So I was born in Transylvania, in Romania, in the early 80s. I should say 500 years ago, because, from the land of vampires, but let's keep it real. And so, yeah, Transylvania is one of the largest provinces of Romania, and it's where both my parents are from. So I spent half of my childhood there until my mother escaped during the Ceaușescu regime, which we didn't know, by the way. She just disappeared from one day to another.
Wow. Okay.
My father or us, I was three of us at the time. I was the eldest. I was 6 years old, and I had two younger sisters. And one day we just found a note from Mum saying, "I've gone to buy some jam." And then we didn't hear from her for over 6 months. We just thought she was dead at the time. So yeah, that was quite a shock. Your face, you were not expecting this.
I was not expecting that. It's like, was she a campaigner or something against the regime or something like that? What happened?
So her and very much as a really young one, she was 28, I think, at the time. Even younger. She was 18, wasn't even 18 when I was born, and I was 6. So yeah, she was 24, around that age. And her and 3 of her girlfriends, and her brother, who was 18 at the time, this is, we found this out a year later, that this is what happened. So they decided to escape through the border and at some point try and get the family over as political asylums in Hungary. Hungary, by that point, this is in 1989. Hungary, by this point, was already a free, the Russians had left, free democratic country, in principle. I'm not going to get into the politics too much, because it's not like our leaders were much better, but, and they decided to start a new life there. Now, of course, Mum didn't tell Dad because she knew that Dad would never go along with the plan. And of course, there's no guarantee you'll survive. And they had 3 young children. So it was very naive and foolhardy, but she just wanted to find a better life for her family, ultimately. That's what drove her to make that decision. So it took them about 4 days, sneaking through the night, hiding in bushes and trees during the day from the militia so they didn't get shot. And I think that on the last day before they made it over the border, by that point they ran out of food, and her brother, my uncle, was getting a bit impatient, and he said, I'm just going to go and see if there's anyone around, because I think we could just keep going. And against everybody else's decision in the group, he made that decision, and unfortunately he got caught. And luckily he didn't get shot, but they beat him up badly, and he was in jail for months until the revolution happened later in 1918. I think it was in December when the revolution happened, or towards the end of that year. But yeah, the rest of the group, so the 4 girls, made it. And then when the revolution happened, 6 months or so later, at this point we had to move in with my paternal grandparents, because Dad was working. He couldn't look after us. So he needed our grandmother's help. So we had to change school, and just life had to carry on, I just remember as a 6-year-old, I guess, you could say the first, I don't know for how long it took me to kind of accept the fact that probably my mother is dead. As a 6-year-old, you're mourning your mother's death. And my sisters were a bit younger, but I would imagine, and I know it was still a shock for them, but they don't remember that much. And then we had the revolution happened, and a few days later we had a telegram that arrived through the local post office, and it was from Mother, and it just said something along the lines of, "I'm alive, I'm well, I'm in Hungary, and I'll be back soon." Yeah. And then at that point, everybody from the family was judging my mum because, well, she left her children, you know. That was then the next stage of this whole saga unfolding. But they reconciled, and Mum came back, and then they were doing some seasonal work over in Hungary, which meant we were with our grandparents a lot, whilst both our parents were trying to build a life in Hungary. But then my father changed his mind. He didn't want to move, and that led to their relationship breaking down. And then, yeah, it's just so you've asked about this Transylvania, and I'm going off on a tangent, but yeah, that's the story. The story then how we ended up in Hungary is between the ages of 6 and 12, through that time of our parents trying to make this work and then eventually not working. My mother stayed in Hungary. There was a court case, this trying to decide where, what happens with us, with the three girls. And initially the court decided that we stay in Romania with our father as to not interrupt our schooling. It would have been a big change. But we were too young to be consulted at that point. My father remarried, and we had an awful stepmother. Awful. She was physically abusing us, hurting us. And at one point I remember I wrote a letter in Hungarian, and I made my sister sign it because I knew that there was an appeal case coming up. And obviously Mum wanted us. And I knew Mum was coming back. So that letter, I managed to post it, went to the courts, and they received it just in time. And I was 11, I think, when I did this. Yeah. I was 11, yeah. And my mother didn't know that letter was written, and my sisters agreed. I wrote down what's happening with our stepmother. My dad didn't know. We were too scared to say anything. So, and my mum had a visitation with us after the court case, an hour, where we were just at one of her friend's house. My dad left us there for just an hour. As soon as Dad left, Mum packed her stuff. We only had just the clothes on us. She also had a 2-month-old baby with her, which was from her, by that point, second marriage, my baby sister, who was 2 months old. So she had her 4 daughters with her. She put all of us on a train and kidnapped us because by this point, there was no court decision made yet. And I remember the train pulling away. And by this point, my father obviously realized that we were not because he came to collect us from his friend's house. So next thing he does, runs to the train station. I have this memory of the train pulling away, my father running after the train, crying. And of course I'm crying because I was a daddy's girl. Even though we had a horrible experience with our stepmother, I was still a daddy's girl. And I knew I wanted this, we wanted to go with Mum, but it was still really an emotional moment. So then we ended up in Hungary. So that's the Transylvania story.
When I said story, wow.
Yeah.
That is a phenomenal story. But it goes to show, I just had a thought in my mind, because for those listeners who live outside the UK, we've had this whole stupid debate in here about immigration and about, frankly, this disgusting language that people use about people invading our country and so on. And I always, because obviously I'm an immigrant myself. My story is nowhere near as interesting as yours. My parents is, I suppose, but it's like people need to understand that there's always a serious story behind migration. There's a reason why people take such risks, because literally, as you just highlighted, your mother took risks. Like, she could have been shot. Yeah. Right? And it's like, and for what? It's not because you're trying to invade anything. You want a better life for your kids, away from dictatorships. Yeah. And I think, we had this conversation before the recording, is that I feel that a lot of countries and people in the Western world, they're so spoiled that they just don't seem to realize how difficult life is out there in the real world. Right? they might say, well, we've been on holiday. We know how poor Africa is. And like, yeah, holiday is one thing. I've been on a lot of holidays, but I've also lived in different countries. Living in a country is one thing. Being on holiday is a totally different thing, right? I mean, I lived in the Middle East. I went there on holidays, amazing. But I've also lived in there. And I'm telling you, there's so much garbage hidden behind the 5-star facades. And people need to understand that. And I get so angry sometimes when I keep on hearing all that nonsense, like our current prime minister going on about, we're a land of strangers and stuff. I'm like, dude, what are you talking about, man? It's like, strangers. Why are we strangers? I mean, we are humans with a lot of stories. And frankly, I'll go as far as saying, and I know it'll piss off a lot of people, but if you look at most successful entrepreneurs, most of them are either immigrants because they have stories like that, and as immigrants, we learn how to adapt to change, which is not an easy thing for vast majority of humans, right? Or people who are neurodivergent in some shape or form, like Sir Richard Branson, for example. I mean, that's another example. So I think what you've highlighted it's a story that represents stories of many, many migrants out there. Like people leave their homes and their lands for a reason. They don't do it because it's some kind of a luxury or greed. It's escaping.
It is. It's about survival. It's about making sure that your children have a chance at a better life ultimately. And for that, people are willing to risk their lives. So
like
that personal motivation, right? And that personal motivation is such a driver. It is about survival. It's not greed or overtaking a country. That overtaking a country comes from our politicians, and most of the time, it tends to be the West that's going after it. So historically, anyway. But I know that these trends change and political shifts happen in a cyclical manner, right? So,
but how does that make you feel then that the West seems to be moving towards dictatorships? It's like they think, democracy failed us. I mean, I have a lot of theories on that, but it seems to me, certainly, I mean, I speak of the United States. I mean, the UK, we managed to vote for the Labour Party, but then the Labour Party seems to be kind of capitulating to Trump. But we're looking at other countries, like, for example, Canada. They went, against the conservative movement. We've seen that in Australia as well. And both of them were pretty surprising results. But even in Romania, at the time of the recording of this video,
you're right,
they went against the conservative movement. So basically, it seems like, I mean, in Europe, or rather, I should say, outside the United States, the world has woken up and realized, actually, guys, we're moving in the wrong direction and it's dangerous. But some people in America were saying that, I don't mind if Trump is a dictator because we need a strong man. What's your message to these people?
Oh my God. And it's somebody from someone who's lived that, for a short period of my time considering that, where you had to live a life where you're not allowed to speak your own language in public. Right, because ethnically I'm Hungarian, even though I was born in Romania. I was born into a Hungarian family. My mum's Romanian, or her family thought they were, but her grandparents changed their family name and never taught the children to speak Hungarian because that's how afraid they were of the system, of the dictatorship. From someone who, as a 6-year-old, was caught speaking my mother tongue in the toilets and slapped by a Romanian adult teacher. And I will never forget, she went, "This is big Romania. You are not allowed to speak any other language." It feels like the world is going backwards now. I've experienced the life where, yes, your family was paid, your parents were paid when they worked, but there was nothing in the shops to buy. You had to queue up at 4 a.m. to buy a loaf of bread, unless you made your own, which if you're in the city and you're working is a different story when you don't have a farm. Or you had to put everything in the collective. So my grandparents were growing crops and animals, but they couldn't just use it for the family, right? They were only allowed so much to use. So they would hide pigs in their cellar and hope that the neighbors didn't report you. Do we want to go back to? I know it sounds very unlikely to happen, but it does feel like the world is moving backwards. And I know, if you look at anthropologists and sociologists looking at the cyclical manner of economy and politics, we tend to repeat. History does repeat. We don't learn. We don't learn from history. But why don't we? Why do we keep making the same mistakes when we know what happened X years ago in these countries? Like, why can't we look at the model of Sweden, for example, where there's right, you mix socialism with capitalism in a healthy ratio, right?
Well,
why can't we do something like that? And then somebody would argue, well, it's natural resources or whatever the reason.
Yeah. Well, it's responsible capitalism, isn't it, that the Nordics are using? And for me, I think it has to be. It's probably it's a combination of different things, but it's obviously education has to be part of it.
Yes.
And at the time when this episode comes out, I would have released an episode where I'm talking about why my wife and I took our daughter out of schooling completely, because it's just, the thing that my wife and I, like, obviously, because my son, he finished school as well. And we were shocked that the stuff they teach them are the same shit that we learned 30 plus years ago. And I'm like, douchebags, do you realize that the world has changed in the last 30 years? I mean, what are you talking about? Yeah. And I think it's part of that. I mean, because the work that we do, for example, with my company, that we research and we study human behaviors. And it's like, and you're right, it's like there's this sort of some kind of weird cycle that tends to happen once every few generations that people don't learn from history. And I think education is a big part of it. But also politicians, what do they do? Politicians do what most politicians do. And I know not all politicians are like that. I know some politicians who are actually not like that 100%. But unfortunately, those who are hungry for power, what is the classic model that worked throughout history? Divide and conquer.
Yeah.
So it's all about dividing. It's all about causing issues. I mean, of course, we've got misinformation. We've got AI that kind of peddles even more and more of that kind of nonsense. But this is how it starts. It's these small behavioral nudges, something that you know very much about, right? It's the tiny behavioral nudges that you poke at people slowly, consistently over time. And before they realize it, like, nobody thought that Trump would be president. I mean, the Simpsons predicted it, I think, in the 90s, and it was a joke.
It's insane.
Right?
And you look at his recent speeches, he's completely bonkers. I mean, he's just not there. There should be an age cutoff as well, I think, for anyone in this sort of power and in that position.
Yeah, I think the whole Biden situation was a disaster. I think that's something that's, I think, like I said, it's, for me, as you know, in my LinkedIn rants, it's like, it's always about the system. The system failed us. I mean, it's the system that we designed for long time ago, but the system hasn't changed, even though the world has changed. People have changed. We've become more, I suppose, more aware of what's going on in the world. But the system is kind of trying to drag us backwards somehow. And I'm just wondering, like, there's that conflict that goes on. I mean, I think I've noticed this certainly like probably mid 2010s, where there's a clear generational divide, sort of the old school versus the new school. I like to see myself as one of the new school, because I'm probably the last generation that existed pre-internet, and I embraced it. And I think there are probably people of my age that didn't embrace it. I doubt it. I don't think so. I haven't met any of them, but I'm sure there are. But we were the generation that we were kind of saying, actually, no, we like this new change. We like this new direction of the world. But our parents' generation were like, no, we don't like that. Hence Brexit, hence Make America Great Again, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, looking backwards and idolizing the past. I mean, I see the same happening, in Hungary. Like Viktor Orban is, we call in Hungary, they call him Little Putin, yet somehow he's still in power.
How?
And this is it. And also, like, how he's changed, because when he was a young politician, I remember he was a young Democrat. He was completely for change and not this politician who bought up all the media. There's real censorship now. There is no real opposition because it's not allowed, because you are either bribed or you disappear if you try and form a real opposition. So how is EU allowing this to happen?
I was about to say, yeah,
it's just unbelievable. So I just lost faith. I try not to. I just skim the news. I have some awareness, because if I read like I used to, and around Brexit time, I used to really be into politics, and I would get so riled up, and I would argue with strangers on the internet to the point where it was affecting my sleep. And I thought, well, this is no good. I need to try and make change in other ways. I need to do something else, because I'm just going to kill myself over, like the stress and anxiety of what's happening with politics.
Yeah.
You are listening to Zsike.